Hi, this is Sarah. I'm going to be interviewing Miriam, who's an immigrant from Cuba today. So let us begin. I'll ask you a few questions. So tell me about where you were born.
I was born in Havana, and that was January 1961, and I came to this country in February 1962.
Okay, so there was a lot of political unrest in Cuba around that time. I'm guessing that influenced why your family decided to move to America.
Yeah, Castro had taken over in '59, and my dad wanted to find a way to get out, and most of the Jewish community left Cuba. Probably 90% of the Jewish community left in 1961, 62, 59, around then.
I read that a lot of people went to Israel also.
Not that many.
Not that many?
A lot went to Miami.
Yeah. So do you feel that the political unrest had any effect on the availability of food while you were there, while your family was there?
No, not at that stage of the game. Everything was still more or less the same. It was just businesses became taken over by the government. Everything was nationalized, and it was a process, but there was still food abundant. In fact, my parents went to a wedding, which was right during the revolution, and there were militiamen. It was a family wedding, my mother's first cousin, and the place was guarded by militiamen, and it was quite a scene.
Wow.
Yeah, and that was in the Jewish center, which is called El Patronato in Havana, where a lot of people had weddings. My parents got married there too.
Okay. So you're Jewish. What was that like being in Cuba? Is there a Jewish community?
Oh yeah, there was a fairly large Jewish community until 1962, and my parents told me there was never any anti-Semitism at all. But communism doesn't go with religious observance, so Judaism and Christianity were kind of put under the carpet. But there was never any outward anti-Semitism.
And was there kosher food available where you were from?
So my mom said there was one kosher butcher in Havana, but she doesn't really know people other than that butcher who really kept strictly kosher.
Yeah, was there like a large religious Jewish community there, or was it mostly more?
So it's nothing like living in Brooklyn or Manhattan or the five towns where I live now.
Yeah.
The community is more traditional. It's small and it's traditional and more accepting of all different variations of observance. Because there's one community center and everybody goes to it. I mean, there were actually 3 synagogues, 3 shuls. There was 2 Ashkenazi ones and 1 Sephardic one. And those 2 cultures were totally separate.
You're Ashkenaz.
Yes, I'm Ashkenaz.
Where did your parents come from?
My parents were born in Cuba. My grandparents came from Poland. But the Sephardic community was in Cuba far longer. The Ashkenaz community mostly came before the war or during the war. And the Sephardic community came way before. But they were considered to be, they had their own culture, their own foods, very different than the Ashkenaz. And the Ashkenaz community kind of considered the Sephardic community to be lower class. And the Ashkenaz were called Polacos, which is Polish by everybody, by the non-Jews. And
even if they weren't from Poland?
They were just Polacos, which is kind of derogatory, but it wasn't really anti-Semitic. And the Sephardic community were called Turcos, even if they weren't all from Turkey.
So in Cuba, what's the most popular meal of the day? What's the main meal? What does it focus on?
So I don't know exactly, but my mother told me that they ate a lot of pork there, a lot of pork products, which obviously my parents, even though they weren't very religious at all, they refrained from eating that. So they would substitute that for other kinds of meat, even if it wasn't kosher. They would stay away from pork. I can get back to you on that question.
Sounds good. What would the meal usually like consist of? Is it like mostly of starch, mostly meat? Is it
Both, a lot of starch and a lot of meat. Like yuca was eaten very much, and white rice. I guess those are the two main starches. Fried bananas, fried plantains.
Yeah.
Is that a starch? I guess it is.
Yeah.
Fried plantains or baked plantains accompanied a lot of meals, but white rice constantly. And I think at least 2 meals a day were meat-based.
So would the lunch be a big lunch?
Yeah, I think they have the siesta culture there.
Right.
But, so I would guess that lunch was big.
Let's talk about the family dynamics in the Cuban culture. Do you feel like what was it like growing up? Was someone in the house more responsible for the kitchen
Yeah,
duties?
definitely. So my mom definitely did all the cooking. The shopping was split half and half because my mom didn't drive much, so my dad did the driving. But my mom did all the cooking and all the cleaning up in the kitchen, for sure. And she decided what was for dinner.
Yeah.
And we always ate dinner at a specific time. It was always at 6 o'clock, no matter what, because my parents both had the kind of jobs that we could do that. And I thought that was normal.
Yeah, I know.
Which it turned out it wasn't.
In my house, it's like everyone eats whatever they want.
Yeah, that's how it is for me today. But growing up, it was 6 o'clock, and you had to be home. If you weren't home at 6, you missed dinner.
So was it like unheard of for the man to do the cooking in a Cuban household?
Yeah, I'm thinking about my relatives, and I think it was always the woman.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
It's not so unusual.
And also, unlike today, where we have so many choices, and moms, like myself even, offer choices, it was whatever it was.
Right.
If my mom made steak and rice for dinner, that was it. It was
complaining about steak and rice anyway.
Because unlike most Cubans, I never liked meat.
Right.
So for me, it was always an issue. But I was always allowed to eat dessert anyway.
Flan. I remember I had flan at your house, at your parents' house.
Yeah, that's a special treat. Flan is hard to make, so that was a special treat. Yeah.
So did your mother teach you how to cook early on in life?
No, my mom, the kitchen was hers, and I could watch and stir, but she was in control. I learned it from being around it, but not hands-on. Yeah, and even today, I don't know all her recipes, and I want to learn them before it's too late. Yeah. You can come with me.
Yeah, maybe I will. For my thesis.
Yeah, we could learn arroz con pollo.
Wait, so what's your favorite Cuban dish to cook?
So, to cook or to eat? That's 2 different things.
Well, first to cook, and then we'll discuss what your favorite
I love
is.
making fried plantains, and I make them for Hanukkah
instead of your house before.
Instead of latkes, because anything fried in olive oil is good for Hanukkah.
See, there's a combination of religion mixed with Cuban culture.
Yeah. And people love having them. They get shocked when I serve them for Hanukkah. And I love making frijoles negros, which is black beans, which serve with white rice. Traditionally, I've changed it to serving it with brown rice, which is like a horrible faux pas. And I make picadillo, which is a meat dish.
What's in that?
So that's chopped meat. It could be a combination of different meats, but I use beef. And it's sweet and savory, so it has raisins, but it also has olives in it, and tomato sauce, and a mixture of sautéed onions and peppers.
Sounds good.
Yeah.
I thought you don't eat meat or cook meat.
So I hardly eat meat anymore, but I still make that dish because it's a big hit. Everybody loves it, and then I usually end up eating a spoonful or more.
You're allowed once in a while.
Yeah, so it's like a once in a while. In fact, I make it for Pesach because there's so little food we can eat on Passover that's tasty. So I make that, but it's traditionally served with rice, so my mom was kind of horrified that I was serving it at the Seder with quinoa, which is allowed. She thought it was totally
unacceptable.
A horrible, unacceptable thing, but at least we had this delicious picadillo, which everybody loves.
I'm so curious to try it now. Was your mom a really good cook?
Yeah, my mom's an excellent. She's still an excellent cook. Yeah.
What else?
Oh yeah, but what was my favorite?
Oh yeah, your
thing
favorite
to
thing
eat?
to eat.
So my favorite, which I don't make, is arroz con pollo. And the reason I don't make it is because I tried it once and it didn't come out right. So I have to watch my mom cook that for sure. And that is like something I request for my birthday, for any special occasion.
What's involved? Is it just rice and chicken, or there's specific?
No, nothing's just.
Yeah, I know.
anything.
So like, what makes it so?
There's saffron in the rice. It's a yellow rice, and it has vegetables in it, and the chicken cooks with the rice. I guess the chicken gets browned first with the sautéed onions and peppers, and then it's cooked so long that it's falling off the bone. It's really delicious. And then it is decorated. It is served on a platter with asparagus lined up and hard-boiled eggs. That's how my mother does it. But I've had it at my aunt's house and at my mother's cousins, and they each do it a little differently.
So is that like a specific Cuban thing?
Arroz con pollo, definitely. And I should mention that Cuban food is not spicy.
I think we learned that.
Yeah. So there are spices. There's saffron, oregano, bay leaves, and salt and pepper, obviously, but nothing hot. There's a lot of paprika, but not hot paprika.
Right. It's like no chili peppers.
No. So the flavor really comes. Almost every dish starts out with the sautéed onion peppers, which has a different name in every language.
What is it in?
I have to think about it. I'll get back to you on that.
Get back to me on that.
Sofrito. It's called sofrito.
Oh.
Yeah.
Oh, so that sounds familiar, but I don't know.
Yeah. I think in French it's mirepoix.
Oh, that mirepoix is, I think, celery, carrots.
Right.
So it's just like the base that you start with.
Every culture has its own base, I'm sure. I'm sure Sephardic culture has a more spicy version with cilantro or whatever. But that's the base, and it makes it delicious.
So what are the most common spices that are used in?
Yeah, I'd say saffron, paprika, oregano. Yeah, it is. But it really adds the punch to the dish.
Yeah.
Although growing up, my mom used to use something called Goya brand Sazon, I think it was. And it had all this artificial stuff.
It's like a mix of...
Yeah, but it also had bad stuff in it. And I've become very interested in health food in the last 20 years. And I always say to her, why are you doing that? Why don't you just use the basic ingredients?
So we've learned in class about how a lot of the cooking from older cultures they've transitioned using bouillon cubes or other things.
My mother does use bouillon cubes for the arroz con pollo. And I told her it's totally not necessary.
Right.
But she's used to making it that way, and it adds a flavor that she likes, which unfortunately has MSG or whatever in it.
Or in Jewish cooking, everyone uses that onion soup mix.
But I don't.
But it's so good.
But it's missing, so maybe that's what was missing when I tried to make the arroz con pollo. Maybe that was
still edible.
The necessary flavor.
So we were talking about traditional Cuban desserts.
Oh.
So what are some of your favorites?
I'm not sure which are Cuban and which are Puerto Rican, because a lot of our family, one of my mother's cousins moved from Cuba to Puerto Rico and raised her children there. So there's obviously been a crossover. But there's one called Tres Leches, which has 3 milks, condensed milk and regular milk and cream, I guess.
Then it's just eaten plain,
it's
or it's
pudding,
put on something?
Kind of cakey thing. I don't remember exactly, but I've had it and it's delicious.
Sure.
Everything is heavily sweetened with real sugar.
Okay.
Flan my mother makes often, which is caramelized, and it's a big job to do with the eggs and everything.
Yeah.
And it would always be served. I don't love flan, but I would love the topping, which is coco, which is coconut. And that's also heavily sugared. So, my favorite dessert is guayaba, which is guava. And we would eat it from the can, these guava shells that were in heavy syrup. Ooh. And it is like any fruit in heavy syrup, but I'm not a big fruit eater. Unlike my Cuban family, they're horrified by me. But guayaba with the heavy syrup is delicious, or it would come in a kind of block. And I would take sandwiches to school of white bread with slices of guayaba on cream cheese, and I would get laughed at. Nobody had a clue what it was, and it smelled weird to them, and I just thought that was normal.
So you could find those kind of things here?
I mean, yeah. My local Key Food has guayaba in that block. Or it also comes in a tin.
Is it solid?
Yeah, it's like, it's solid. It's like a jelly-ish consistency, a little harder.
And I have to write all these things down to try them now.
Yeah, it has a nice texture if you like that kind of thing. It is very yummy.
So you said that your family eats a lot of fruit, and it's horrifying that you don't.
My parents love papaya, and mangoes, and avocado, which is a fruit too. And I grew up kind of shunning all that stuff.
You're always like a stick, so you could eat whatever you wanted. You didn't need any of that nonsense.
Yeah, but as I got older, and when I visited Israel and got to eat that stuff fresh and in season, which is what my parents grew up with, as opposed to how we were eating it at home.
Right.
And
I'm sure
imported.
it's much more amazing when you're...
Yeah, so in Israel I learned to really like mangoes and avocados. And not so much papaya. That's an acquired taste,
I don't like
think.
papaya.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then there's other littler fruit called mamoncillo, which has a different name in Puerto Rico. And
what do you compare it to?
Kind of like a lychee, but not. Like very dark, smooth skin. And I don't have a taste for it, but mamoncillo. With a Z, probably. Instead of an S. Yeah. And there's so many other fruit. You could ask my parents for details. There's one fruit that they rave about, and they found it for Rosh Hashanah. You're supposed to eat a new fruit and say a blessing over it. So they try to find some Caribbean fruit that they really miss, and I'll think of the name.
So those are probably hard to find.
But in the Jewish grocery stores, they cater to the whole Rosh Hashanah thing, the New Year thing, and they get all these fruit from California or from Venezuela or wherever they come from. And my husband's from South Africa, and that's also the same climate, more or less. So he grew up eating the same fruit, and he totally loves going to my parents and eating all this stuff. Yeah.
So we talk about all these foods you love. What's your least favorite Cuban dish? Could you think of one if you had to? Or Cuban popular food?
Well, I guess the heavy meat dishes. Yeah.
So were you forced to eat a lot of meat growing up?
I wasn't forced. It was placed in front of me, and I would eat it or not eat it. I would pick at it. I was a fussy eater back then.
So would you have meat every night for dinner?
Yeah, definitely. Wow. I don't know if that was an American thing also in the 60s. It could very well have been the typical American housewife thing to throw a steak on, or lamb chops. It was, and also chopped meat in any form. But my mom used to make meatloaf with a hard-boiled egg cooked into it, and I thought that was Cuban, but I'm not sure.
I don't know, my grandmother used to make that. We call it the surprise. In the center.
So I guess it wasn't Cuban. My mom liked looking at cookbooks, and she wanted to be American, even though she's so Cuban, so she, tried to integrate American food.
Right.
We even, oh my God, what a horror, we had TV dinners as a treat. That was a special treat when my mom started going to school and working and had less time. My sister and I would get a TV dinner with a Salisbury steak.
Ooh. But you don't like meat.
I ate it then. It was
dabbled.
And once in a while it was like KFC. That was a very big deal. And it's sort of horrifying because my mom was such a good cook.
It's like.
But they also thought it was like an American treat.
Part of the American culture also, I guess, like going, like working and not having time.
Yeah. I think she'd feel guilty about it. There must be my least favorite would be something called ropa vieja, which means old clothes. And it's a shredded kind of meat. I couldn't tell you what cut of meat it is because I don't buy that stuff. But shredded and cooked until it's really soft. And that's just too meaty for me, but they love it. And my mom would also make bistec cubano, which I did like, but I didn't want to eat too much of it. And that was very thin, pounded cuts of meat without the bone, cooked in onions, like tons of onions. So I would just
Sounds
eat.
so good.
I would just eat the onions and the juices of the
Uh-huh.
meat, and like kind of push the meat to the side. But that was a delicious
That
food.
sounds good.
Yeah.
How bad could it be?
But another favorite thing,
More favorites.
Yeah.
Or no least favorite.
which is sugar related, was just the way my mom and dad would both have their café cubano, which is Cuban coffee, or even American coffee. And that was with, my mom said when she first came to this country, she would put 7 sugars in her coffee. And people, you know, she thought it was totally normal because that's how it's taken in Cuba. And they probably even have smaller cups. And when people looked at her, or her American friends, they thought she was nuts. So she slowly started cutting out 1 teaspoon at a time.
Ooh.
And I think she's down to 3,
That's not
which
so
is
bad.
what I take in my
Still?
coffee. Oh, yeah.
Wait, and so what is the typical breakfast like in Cuba? Is it everyone just has coffee and that's it, or is there usually...
No,
The
I'm
company.
sure they eat some kind of bread, pan cubano or something, like a white bread with
Is that
butter.
what's
Yeah, I'm not sure. I just know there is pan cubano.
Okay.
And, you know, cheeses and probably a lot of bacon. And
Is cheese a big thing there, or not so?
it was in my
Dairy,
house
it's
growing
more-
up, but I don't know if it
Uh-huh.
is really.
Okay.
But the desserts are dairy. Those tres leches.
So as we talked about earlier, you're Jewish, and in Cuba you said there wasn't that many kosher places to buy food at, but so were there any?
Right. So my parents and my grandparents ate kosher style. They did the best they could, eating not pork, but other cuts of meat, and trying to keep meat in.
So they didn't eat kosher meat in the sense that it wasn't butchered in the kosher...
There was one kosher butcher, but I don't know if
Yeah.
they bought that. Maybe for holidays, for special occasions, but I don't think so. I think it was probably very expensive. And,
Were there ultra-Orthodox Jews in Cuba? Or
no,
not?
not really.
Okay.
No, most of the Jews who came to Cuba, the Ashkenazi Jews, came from the shtetl, escaping that, and they had to adjust like they did in every country, and kept the traditions, but did the best they could. So one thing was adapting to not having the dairy dessert with the meat meal, which is, you know, what's done in Cuba, and just changing that up. Or waiting a while.
Waiting 3 to 6 hours. And when you came, do you think that your family became more religious once they came to America? Because there was more like access to...
Yes, so definitely my dad especially felt that he didn't grow up with the opportunity. He was not from Havana. He was from a small town called Victoria de las Tunas. And then, so he didn't have much Jewish exposure at all, except for the traditions his parents did at home. And in fact, he's told me that my grandfather, before a holiday, he would go all the way to Havana, which was maybe like an 8-hour bus ride or whatever, and he'd come back, say, before Passover with 1 box of matzah. So they would have matzah, but they would also have bread because that's what was available, or go without. Whereas my mom lived in Havana and was able to have all the traditions and even had, you know, full seders with whatever. My dad said also his dad would bring home like 1 jar of gefilte fish from the U.S.
Wow.
And that was that. And my mom probably, you know, her mother was able to make gefilte fish from scratch and all those foods. So my mom had a much more traditional upbringing, and my dad less so until he married her and moved to Havana. And when they came to this country, they weren't observant, just traditional. And then once they had me and my sister and sent us to yeshiva, they became much more, they started observing more and more. And again, adapting their Cuban rituals and traditions into a Jewish observance.
So in Cuban food and Cuban culture, what's the, like, how do they look at nutrition? Do they factor it in at all to the way they cook?
So I don't think they did at all in the old days, just like they didn't here in the U.S. with all the fast food mania and everything. You know, all that pork and frying things, it's certainly not healthy, but that's the cuisine, and it is for Jewish food and for lots of cultures. That's what's delicious.
It is.
But as we become more conscious of health issues, you know, you adapt it. And my mom uses less oil in the pan to fry those.
And only 3 sugars in her coffee.
And only 3 sugars in her coffee, and tries to watch, you know, how much rice she consumes.
Right. And so do you feel like the people in Cuba, do they have weight issues or anything?
So, I mean, the people in Cuba have gone through extreme changes with the government and with the politics. And when the U.S. became not part of Cuban culture and Russia took over, I think the culture took in Russian types of food products and adapted with that. And then there was the special period, which is when the whole communist system fell in Russia. And so Cuba had no more support at all. They were kind of stranded on their own with no American import and no Russian import. And that special period is a euphemism for starvation.
Right, yes.
And my uncle told me that he and all his family members lost, you know, like 30 pounds each.
How long was that period?
A few years.
And when?
Exactly. So there are crazy stories of people eating literally garbage. In fact, making pizza out of like condoms and things like that. That's like one of those urban myths, which may be true.
Wow.
There was nothing, you know. And today, I was in Cuba 5 years ago, and things have lightened up a little bit ever since the Pope visited Cuba 15 years ago or whenever it was. Cuba's doors became a little more open, and U.S. relations with Cuba changes with each presidency.
Are we allowed to go to Cuba? Was it always that way, or
no?
It's like very recent?
Only recently. During the Clinton administration, the doors were open, but you needed a reason, either visiting family or some cultural reason, where you're a photographer or some sort of artist. And then the doors closed again during the Bush administration. You could look all that up online. It's like with each presidency, it changes radically. And then Obama opened it up again. And besides going on humanitarian missions, which is how I went 5 years ago, where you literally bring suitcases full of clothes and simple things like pencils and paper.
Did you go alone, or
no, I went with a group, with a Jewish humanitarian group, and we were each supposed to bring at least one extra suitcase to donate all the goods. And we brought Hanukkah candles and candy and everything. Simple things like batteries and medications, of course, to donate, not just to the Jewish community, but to everybody. But what were you saying?
About whether you could go to Cuba or not.
Yeah, so now you can go even on these people-to-people missions, and there are food-related ones where you go and taste the local food and drink, and there are bed and breakfasts and things like that that didn't exist even 5 years ago.
But so you're a citizen, I'm guessing, right?
Yeah.
Of Cuba, so as a citizen you can't just,
Cuba,
you couldn't go whenever...
Cuba considers me a Cuban citizen,
so then
even though I'm an American citizen. So I can go there from the Cuban side anytime, but it's the U.S. side that has a lot of red tape. On both sides, there's a ton of red tape and a lot of money passing hands to pay for all these forms to be filled out and whatever. And then when you come back into the U.S., so as an American, even if these missions are all allowed now, and there's people-to-people missions and the humanitarian ones, and you could go as an artist, as a journalist, as a nutritionist probably to do a thesis. And a lot of the universities have programs, overseas programs, including Cuba. But you are still not allowed as an American to spend money in Cuba on whatever you want. You're allowed to only bring back culture, which is music, musical instruments or CDs. You cannot bring rum. You can't bring cigars. Probably can't bring food items, I would guess.
Culture, kind of.
I think it's culture, but you're not allowed to bring any of that. And when we came back into Miami, there were dogs sniffing our suitcases to make sure we didn't have anything. Coffee.
I could see the cigar thing being like a big...
but coffee even, and any of the products from there.
Wow. Wow.
But also during this special period, also, I mean, I'm opinionated because of my background, but Fidel kind of screwed up the whole farming industry because he had all these ideas to switch things around, and he ruined some of the basic products like the tobacco industry and sugar cane. Cuba actually imports sugar today, which is crazy because that was one of the biggest exporters. And hopefully that'll all change back sometime.
You really did a number on,
Yeah.
So, what's something that you could find in Cuba that you would never be able to find here? That's like a food item that you would miss.
I guess some of the tropical fruits that are indigenous there. Maybe like specific types of fish.
Yeah, so is there,
I ate fish there. I don't know if it was fresh or frozen. I can't tell. Fishing is not allowed to the locals unless they have a special permit, because the locals still are not allowed out on the water for fear that they may leave the country. So Cuba's an island surrounded by beautiful, beautiful, untainted water because of the lack of industry and the lack of cruise ships from the U.S. being allowed to come in. There are incredible beaches and places that have been preserved for 50, 60 years. So I ate fish there, but I don't know where it came from.
And is fish not a big...
I think seafood is big.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. But I didn't eat seafood because I keep kosher. Yeah. So politics does really play a role in the food.
Yeah,
thing.
Seems like it does.
Yeah. So also when I visited my uncle in Cuba 5 years ago, they still have ration books, as a communist country would have.
Right.
And I didn't get to see the ration book. They conveniently couldn't find it when I asked to see it.
But why would they not want to?
I don't know, privacy or whatever. But the ration book allows for just the minimum basics, which is white rice and the lowest level of rice, like not clean, where you'd have to pick out the pebbles and everything, and maybe like one chicken a month and X amount of sugar, and just basics, really small basics. And you really can't survive on that.
So how do they?
So they actually hosted us for a meal, but they put out things that had been donated by the Jewish Center, which are donations coming from Americans visiting, from Canadians visiting, or South Americans. And
I think it probably works anyway.
So we had this whole meal, including wine from, I think, Argentina, which also has rabbis visiting Cuba, whatever. So my uncle said he gets a basket of food as a Jew, who's part of the community, before each Jewish holiday, Passover, Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, not Yom Kippur, Sukkot, Hanukkah, and he was hosting us with these donated items, with things from the rations, and also because he has 2 sons who've moved overseas and sent him money, he can buy food products in other markets, which the local Cubans are only privy to if they have dollars or euros.
Wow.
So it's a multi-tiered economic
system. They're still very like limited in their food availability.
Yeah.
So you were mentioning that they had you over. Is hospitality a very big thing in Cuban culture, and like sharing meals?
Yeah, that was beautiful, and it was just very comfortable to sit there and see what how they set up the table for us. Very, very casually, but very warm. And the Cubans on the street are all warm and smiling, despite their incredible hardships. I don't know if it's the weather or what, but they seem to have a pretty happy attitude. And anybody's willing to talk to you. I didn't feel any like anger towards me as an American. And a lot of Cubans are turning their homes, now that things are opening up a little politically, they're turning their homes into paradores, which are kind of like bed and breakfasts or, you know, just dinner places where they'll serve foreigners at their table. But I believe that the government is still a partner in any of those ventures. And we, being in a group, we ate meals together as a group in some amazing places that were mansions that used to be privately owned by Cubans that were taken over by the government in the early 60s and have been turned into these restaurants, which are government owned. So, and they'd all have entertainment, they'd all have Cuban music being played live, and those musicians would get tips from the audience, and they would make more in an evening on the dollar tips they would get than a doctor.
Right. Wow.
So it's good to be in the tourism business in Cuba because you can get cash tips. Yeah. Like the average Cuban doctor, I think, makes $20 a month or something crazy like that.
What's the whatever?
They use pesos there, but there's pesos that are Cuban for the natives, and there's also Cuban convertible pesos, which are used by tourists, because as an American, you can't use your dollars, you can't use your credit cards, your cell phone, nothing American. Europeans can and Canadians can, but they also convert their money into the Cuban convertible pesos. And of course, there's a surcharge on that. Yeah. The big one, I think it was like 10%, both ways. Because when you leave the country, you want to get your cash back because there's nothing to do with that. And we'd be fined again. Wow. Yeah, it was fascinating. I recommend you go to Cuba.
Now I'm inspired to. Yeah. So is there anything else you want to share about, like, anything?
The music. Because the music is really a part of the culture in a huge way, and we're getting a lot of it here. Right. Ever since, what's it called? The Buena Vista Social Club movie, and all those singers from that.
What is that movie?
So you'll look at that.
Okay, I will.
I'll lend you the CDs. And salsa is huge all over the world. So I think that's also something that makes the Cubans happy people, despite their circumstances. They're very into the music and the instruments and the drumming and the African roots of the music as well. And it's just an incredible culture. And it's 90 miles from Key West. It's like crazy that we don't know our own closest neighbor that has such a rich culture to offer us. So go there.
I will. Thank you so much for doing this. And